Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Kim.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration.
If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restoretheglory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you again. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Jake. How are you?
I'm doing well. Bob, we're recording this, and it's not too far away from your birthday. So,
and yours too.
Oh, well. If you didn't know, Bob and I do share the same birthday, and we're recording just a few days before our actual birthday, but we're not going to say what it is. We'll let people have to figure that out. So, Bob, we are in a series here for priests. And we just had Matt on. That was an awesome episode. And so we're continuing on in this series. Again, our hope and our goal is to be able to bless priests as well as bless the broader audience in the sense of relating to priests, ministry to priests, etc. And so what I love about last episode and today is that we're actually having lay people on to talk about priests, because I think that's a really fun spin. We will have a priest on in our final episode. So, Bob, who do we have with us today? Please introduce our special guest.
All right. It is my pleasure to introduce somebody that I've only met once before this conversation, and that was by phone. And I was introduced to her by my bishop, Bishop Bill Walk, and it's Teresa Pitt Green. And just in the middle of that conversation, I was just so inspired by her life story and what she's doing and how her love for the church that I proposed to you and to her that she be a guest on this series. And she graciously said yes. So welcome, Teresa.
Welcome, Teresa.
Hello.
It's awesome to have you with us. We're so grateful that you're here and joining us. So, Teresa, tell us a little bit. Why do you think that Bishop Walk said, Bob, you got to talk to Teresa in relation to priests? And that's maybe an odd way to intro it, but I'm just curious, what do you think, why he would wanted us to talk to you?
I think it's because it was kind of the bishop to meet me and to talk with me. And I think he, like all the bishops that we work with, are surprised by the importance that we place on priests, particularly as the antidote to the wounds that come out of the scandals of abuse, and also as the antidotes to the world that appears in our pews in our churches of people who've been traumatized in one way or another. So that's essentially a large section of my ministry is to work with clergy and help them feel confident in their important healing role in an area that's counterintuitive. And that always surprises people.
Yeah, share a little bit, Teresa, about the ministry and what you do, and then we'll get into where the passion comes from in a minute.
I co-founded this with another survivor of clergy abuse. And we came together after working 20 years in parallel work, helping to build up the church and to help survivors who find it safe enough to eventually come back to some kind of relationship with the church. It's a very difficult process, as everyone knows by now. There's no easy click that makes it look like one might expect. It's very individual. And one of the things that we have both found over the years, and now I've been in this 23 years, as a survivor of abuse who is trying to help people reconnect with God, to heal, and ideally, maybe through the sacraments in the church, find closeness with God. One of the things, it just is remarkable that the impact of a priest or a clergy or a bishop in a conversation with a person who's been wounded by clergy abuse or any abuse, really. And we found priests and clergy and bishops kind of uncomfortable in that environment. So we started to have a dialogue with them about how it's not our program, how they, in each of their individual beautiful gifts of self, can incorporate a creative understanding of how they can reach out even to this area where confidence is undermined, where naturally people are so careful. They sometimes don't say the things that need to be said or don't have the permission not to know the answer. So by having conversations with us in our ministry, they go out and help countless other people. I can't be the healer that a clergy can be. I don't aspire to be, but I can help that priest or bishop have that conversation. And I'll tell you something that's really beautiful. Not only do the people who are harmed find healing, but the priests and the clergy find healing too. It's why it was sort of easy to even close my old business and do this full time, because it's such an incredibly beautiful, grace-filled moment to see and serve. So that's what I do. And I do that all the time. In whatever way, I work with different bishops and provincials and clergy. I try to stay under the radar because it's such a sensitive topic and people are so hurt by it. You know, we've always tried to go in really low key. It's all relational and trust. And I believe, and you can ask anybody I work with, I believe that every relationship I have with every clergy member, every priest, every deacon, every bishop, every provincial, every religious brother, I believe that that heals the rupture that happened in the church when clergy harmed me when I was little. And I believe that, I truly believe that's a gift at the end of my life that I'll give God as its own bouquet. Now, it's just how I do it. It's not how everybody should do it. It's a little bit crazy, some of the stuff I've done and, some of the paths I've taken and chosen to be, but it's worth the amazing, quiet impact of watching the real healers freed to heal.
So, Teresa, I want to make sure I understand. I'm hearing you describe a ministry. Yeah, I think I'm digesting. So, thank you for the space here to digest for a second. If I'm understanding, you minister to priests to help them know how to navigate individuals who have been abused by clergy. I'll include clergy here to mean priests, bishops, provincials, all those that you listed a moment ago. And so your ministry is really going and helping those priests learn how to love well in these circumstances, particularly with those who have been hurt by a priest. And so it's quite an interesting dynamic because you're coming in, I'm hearing you say, as someone who knows it personally and someone who's experienced in the ministry that a priest can bring, both positive and negative. And so you're trying to really form, educate, minister to the priests so that they know how to love well the individuals in their communities who have been hurt by priests. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, that's very much what I do. And if I can add to that is the concept that if you think about what happened when I was abused as a child, there was a series of abusers between ages 6-ish and 19. A series of different abusers were in a town that had way too many abusers assigned to it. What happened there was this, to me, a tectonic rupture between the innocence of childhood and the sanctity of priests. And a lot of people, and I get this. I understand survivors and other people in the church are triggered when they see priests by association, right? But my experience is that I experience the opposite of what a priest is. What an example is, a priest will teach and encourage virtues like humility, where abusers imprint humiliation. And a priest exists to forgive. That's the commission. abusers perverted that to enabling. And I can go down a whole list of stuff. I have a whole program I do for priests, but there's this other idea that the priests themselves, the holiness of the priest, an abuser destroys free will. Absolutely. You don't even know what free will is after abuse. You have to learn what it means to choose. Whereas a priest empowers free will, he cultivates it so that we can choose God. So my experience, my way I processed it, was to see a radical distinction between the abusers, who were dressed like clergy, and clergy. So to me, to sit with a priest and talk about those distinctions, it's rather shocking because it seems so obvious to me, but that's why we call ourselves Spirit Fire. You see a fire come back on. You see the culture that's been telling priests they're weirdos, all this stuff. You see it lose power. And all I'm doing is talking about my experience as a survivor, right? And so what an amazing thing to be able to do with, I get to live this life right now and say these things. And fortunately, I didn't go down a lot of paths I could have. That was grace of God.
And how healing for you as well, I imagine, just every interaction with priests and bishops to be received and be heard and be listened to. I imagine it's just constant reinforcement of the healing that the Lord is doing in your life.
It really is, Bob. It's so beautiful. I thank all of them. I think of them as unique friends. I will say I also, part of the ministry runs into the resistance and the anger and the hurt, which I'm now able to see as hurt, so that the resistance and pushback is really the engagement of that individual's hurt. Because I think it's important for people to remember, priests, bishops, you just have to sit on a review board to see how hurt they are by this too. And different, different strengths, different backgrounds in their life, different diocesan experiences. And so if I can keep even engaging the resistance as the hurt that it is, I think I'll navigate the next few years of this work. And the beautiful part is it always opens these conversations. So beautiful. I mean, people should go to therapy. I have profound respect for good trauma therapy. But in the end, therapy is based on a study of God's creation. And that victim is so much more than even the best therapy can comprehend. Where will we find our center except with our God, with our Creator? Who can bring the graces into life? No one like clergy. I do work with other ministers to help them, but I keep saying we'll still guide them into some kind of comfort level with clergy. Even if it's the pastor, is okay. I'll facilitate a conversation. There may never be a second, but they've really come to a place of safety. Just incredible.
So what a gift that you are and that you're bringing to the church. I've, along with Bob, worked with many priests, and this topic is one of the most difficult for them. I think many would say the most difficult topic that they encounter, because they have this experience of, I didn't do that, but now I'm associated with having done that. And, I have friends who've gotten yelled at, spit on, lives threatened, all those kinds of things. And they're like, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. And then that's one kind of angle, but the nuance that you're talking, the delicate care that's required to love a person back to safety and trust is this is what Bob and I have done for decades. But the nuance that you're bringing in is it's astounding to me. It's the healing kind of coming from a representation of the abuser, right? So the abuser being a priest, the priesthood isn't the problem. It was the man, but it gets quickly, instantly associated with the priesthood. And I'm hearing you try to restore redeem both sides of it so that as the thing that God intended happens again. It's like the kingdom of God coming back at hand through the work that you're doing. It's beautiful. It must be incredibly rewarding.
It's rewarding. It's very difficult. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm not complaining. I'm just not recommending it for everybody. It's incredible. They talk about the beauty of Catholicism, which is there. This is the beauty of Catholicism. To me, the thing I think priests are up against a number of things. I've worked with a lot of priests. I've worked with priests who've been abused themselves. I've worked with religious brothers and sisters who have been, and also a lot of vocations are born in trauma, not necessarily abuse, but somebody lost a parent early, but they found some incredible empathy. There's a lot to honor in this, what I will consider, and still a very mystical, a little bit strange choice to be a priest. I'm not going to ever pretend I understand it, even though I serve it and love it. I think priests are also caught up with a zeitgeist that has used therapeutic terms, kind of done all sorts of strange things with them. With a zeitgeist that sends a lot of people into the pews, having created an identity based on those kind of jargon terms. Even like, oh, I'm depressed today. Just a lot of quick things. Or when I meet a survivor and they'll say, well, I'm bipolar, and that's what they want me to meet first, their diagnosis. The power of priests is to be able to talk to all of that because it's God's creation, but we have so much more. We understand so much more what it is to be a full person. Even the concept of healing. When I work with a survivor and they're kind of starting with their concept of healing, it's beautiful. You can hear in it God's signature of what He created them to be anyway. But then you start bringing them over to the fullness of God's concept of a human. Wow. And then when I get a priest who's been sensitized to this coming in for one conversation, talking about another spirit fire. A lot of priests think they have to do kind of hourly spiritual direction to make this work. They don't. They do need a team of people around them, like ministers who are savvy and good therapists around. They need, different things like that. And a lot of bishops will sit with survivors during, different processes, and the survivor will be screaming at them. And there's a difference between knowing what that means and how to respond to that versus just taking it in. The poor guy, like, what do I do? The anger goes into their bodies and they get sick versus, I get survivors who yell at me often and they kind of get mad at me at different times because I'm kind of with the enemy sometimes. And what to do when you're asked as a Christian witness, I'll go on a little detour here. I just recently gave 3 retreats. All of them were about when a survivor's in front of you, the hardest thing and why people run away from this is the utter powerlessness you feel in the presence of the effect of evil. And you're like, what can I say? How can I fix it? How can I help this person? Well, you know what? You can't. You try to say the right thing. That's just magical thinking. Chances are that person's going to walk away and not feel great. But as a Christian witness, we sit there with the powerlessness, which is what they have gone through too. And maybe that first encounter, and I work with priests a lot on this one, goes to the tabernacle with us in our heart. We've kind of absorbed it a little bit. We acknowledge that, and we leave it at the tabernacle for that person until such time as they can walk in themselves. And that's a way of processing this incredible wave. What I guess it would be called transference and countertransference, although I think that's limited to the psychological environment. Somebody's told you a story without words and you're walking away holding it physically. You can take that to the tabernacle for the person. And all of a sudden, you're still powerless. Guess what? That's why Jesus had to come. None of us could do this. This is the amazing witness of Jesus in that person's presence. And that I might not be able to use the name Jesus with this person for a couple of years. We wait out the wound. And that's just me. You have priests who are going and saying Mass. And there's a lot of things they can do that I can't. And it really works. And it heals the priest and the person at the same time.
Wow. A couple of things I want to comment on. One is you mentioned about healing. And so I want to offer the definition that we use for healing and see what you think in relation to the work you're doing. So we say healing is an ongoing encounter with God's love and truth that brings us into wholeness and communion. How does that fit with your experience of the process that you're involved in?
It's really quite beautiful. It does. Yeah, it is so true. It's so much better than kind of definitions of healing I've had in the many different hours of therapy that didn't understand the God piece. What I would say is a lot of survivors might only get 70% there. And maybe this is true of other people with trauma, and that's a beautiful 70%. I don't know what 100% is, Bob, but I think like the word communion makes me a little nervous because survivors have been so hurt by the church. Sometimes just getting in the narthex is so brave. Talking to another Catholic in communion might take a couple of years. But that would be the only caveat. The concept of belonging is so beautiful.
Yeah, let me separate the sense of the word communion from Holy Communion, which is the ultimate communion, is with Jesus and the Trinity. But communion being the capacity for trust and relationship, that as we heal, we grow in trust and we're able to have a capacity for relationship, which ultimately brings us into the ultimate communion.
That is exactly true. I wouldn't add anything to that. And think of if you've been wounded by a priest and you could somehow have a little safe experience, think of all the other relationships that get a little safer because the core piece got a little soothed. And of course, trust is the hardest thing. It's hard for any person.
Teresa, we have many priests who listen to the podcast. And could you give them kind of some taste and flavor of things that you've learned over the years, things that you offer to people in your retreats and in your ministry? Like maybe just imagine for us, there's just a good-hearted priest. Maybe he's been a pastor for 5 years, and he encounters potentially his first person who approaches him and says they were abused by a priest, and he's just stuck in the, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. Like, how would you accompany him?
Well, the first thing I would recommend is being prepared for the eventual thing that would happen. And in fact, he can prepare for anyone coming up saying that they're going through abuse by having maybe a list of therapists that are good, having some resources, maybe even food pantries and things. Because what will happen, I've had it where I'm in the aisle of a grocery store, somebody comes, tells me their story in 5 minutes because they saw me speak the night before, and then they're gone and I never see them again. I mean, there's a lot of ways people come up to you, but let's assume there can be a conversation after. 2 things to think of: boundaries and in the moment. Let's say a survivor comes up, talks to him, tells him something. Even to be so brave is to say this to a priest. It'll be a huge moment for the survivor. And they're going to be 99% chance they're going to be really close to the past wounds. And all the programming says never tell anybody because you'll be even more unsafe if you tell anybody. So that person's going to be full of like an emotional static that's going to be such a courage to still walk through it. So first, keep it really simple and gentle. Everything from your voice, don't be really loud. People get nervous sometimes. They talk louder or faster. Keep it very simple. One of the first things you can ask when this person is so close to their past or to the experience they're not supposed to talk about, it's bubbling up from where it's been buried, is just, how are you right now? Are you safe? Are you okay? And that's the first set of things to take care of, because it could be a person who might be telling you about the abuse in the past, but they're in an abusive relationship, which is what spurred them to tell you in the second case. all these things can happen. So just, are you okay? If you got food or place to stay, a lot of people are going to say everything's fine. And the other thing is to decide whether this is the right place for this person to start pouring forth. You can do things like, how can I help you? Would you like to talk to me? Would you like to talk to somebody? How can I help you? Or depending on the person, which you have to pick up in the interaction, do you know that there is somebody within the diocese you can talk to? Or would you rather talk to me? Find your way to have a conversation with them. And let's say it comes up, a lot of times it's after church. The most common time it happens is in confession. The first time I told a priest it was in confession because I was confessing that I had been abused. And he was like, that's not a sin. And we had this argument. But it's understanding, okay, this isn't the place for this conversation. And saying, would you like to come talk to me? Would you like to talk a little later? I've got to let the people go by. So those kind of things. And also it helps the priest get himself into the position of command, not overpowering, but guiding this very chaotic, painful moment. So those are the two things I recommend. And then there's a whole series. I have a whole tree of, okay, if they want to talk more, if they, you still have a VAC. If the person's been abused by a priest, the priest has got to be very careful because he can get in a very awkward situation. How to negotiate that conversation with the person, all these different things. But mostly it's helping him keep it moving and helping him both reduce liability and be the great priest that says, if you need food, if you don't have a home, if you're afraid to go home, there are other people in my parish who can help you with that, and I'll be here to talk to you as well.
Can I ask a follow-up there? So can you share now with us some of the things that, and it's not funny, but I'm laughing to cover the cringiness of it, that I'm sure you've heard with regard to when the priest got it really wrong in that setting. What are some of the things that priests maybe do? And it's like, oh, dear Lord, please don't ever do this. Like an example you said is arguing about whether or not it's a sin. It's like, now's not the time. That's not the time to argue when someone's disclosing pain. So give us some more of those. So,
I'll give you some more of those and then I'll tell you that story. One is, and I have a whole list of these things. Don't tell the person to get over it. Don't, and whatever you do, and Catholics, not just priests, go at this immediately. Don't start talking about forgiving the person. I'm not saying forgiveness isn't an important goal, but don't go there with the survivor, because how many times have we been told to forgive and forget? It's not our choice. If I could have forgiven and forgotten, I would have done that when I was, 22. I've spent a lifetime coping with this. So don't do that. Another is to start asking questions to elicit more history. And then that's bad enough, because then you're putting the person back into their history without them necessarily wanting to go. And then they're getting all the emotions and they're not ready to go. And probably it belongs with the therapist more. Then the next thing I've heard is priests starting to ask for the detail. So they're starting to go into the judgment mode. They don't even notice it. The survivor's freaking out. And remember, you only get one chance. The person goes running, they may never come back. I don't mean to load it up that way, but that is what is true. Another thing is, if you have somebody who comes, and I feel for a priest who gets this, comes to a priest really angry, and the priest reacts like a normal human being, like, don't be angry at me. I've heard priests start arguing back or getting very intellectualized. So they're not talking about the person's experience anymore. Now it's like, how about them lawsuits? Or, I know plenty of priests who've been accused, that were innocent. Well, he may have. But right now you've got a person falling apart in front of you. And let's say a lot of priests really struggle with this, like the world does. You'll have a victim come up to you. They're a wreck. You know them to have been an addict or have been in car crashes or have been one of those kind of people who are questionable. And they come to you and they somehow tell you this has happened. And I've heard priests immediately say, well, they've had a lot of problems. I can't really believe it. First, it's more likely than not that they were abused by the fact that they're behaving this way. But you don't doubt. You're not there to judge. You're there to help the person find God. And then there's a lot of other people to direct them to. who can deal with all the other issues. Now, you got to know how to carefully stay out of getting in liability issues. This is possible without losing focus on the core thing that you bring. And you don't try to fix it. You don't try to get in there, roll up your sleeves, manage it for the person. You see the person's life is falling apart. Let me help. It's the worst thing you could do, because that person has learned helplessness. Your role is to be part of a group of people that help them get strong enough to not be helpless. And if they've screwed up their life to this moment, you're not going to roll up your sleeves and save them. That's sort of where the savior complex eclipses the service to Jesus, to let Jesus come in and be the savior. So I'm rattling through a lot. There's a huge list of different things where, you just don't, but mostly you don't pick up responsibility for that person. And then I'll just tack on that story, if you don't mind. I had just fled my hometown, and I went to college, and an abuser tried to find me and stalk me there. So it wasn't until I was working in New York City as a young careerist, very ambitious, very smart, going places fast, that I started to I wasn't going to church. I was not interested in the morality of the church. I would see priests on the streets of New York City, a block away, and I would have an anxiety attack. I'd have to withdraw into Gimbel's, front door just to kind of breathe again. And it was just at the time that the first lawsuits were hitting the news dailies. In New York, they were definitely hitting the news dailies. And Louisiana and the Gilbert case, and some of the cases started to bubble up way before Boston was even on the radar. But I paid attention to all of it, didn't tell anybody. And I used to creep in the back of St. Francis of Assisi in the Midtown Manhattan during adoration in the basement. They have two chapels. The basement was where a lot of the people who had been deinstitutionalized had set up shop. And they would go to the food pantry that the Franciscans often did. They would live down there, and they would howl. And even when they offered mass, these people would be there. And I went there and found myself at home in a church. I felt safe with the crazy people. I felt safe with the Eucharist because there wasn't any priest talking. There were Franciscans. They weren't in the black clerics, which is what triggered me. And I would just sit for hours with the Eucharist. And I was studying this one guy because I kept thinking, well, what happens if I could go back to Mass? And I kept studying this friar. And eventually I went to the confession in this crazy setting with these people making crazy sounds. God bless them all. And he started doing all the wrong things, like arguing. I was like, I gotta confess this. Listen, it's not a sin. That was enough. But of course, I was me. So I was arguing with him. So I was a little heated too. Finally, he said, let's talk about this after. So sure enough, for the first time in several years, I was in a room with a priest with a closed door before the charter. So there were no windows. He was sitting at the desk between me and the door. Worst thing you could possibly do. I tell him what happens. He gets enraged and pounds the desk. I've got this angry priest having been abused by angry priests. And he did everything wrong, and he saved my faith. So what I say to priests, look, even if you don't get it right, if God means to use you as an instrument in that moment, and you walk away and you feel like I did the wrong thing, be careful. Because God, I don't know what the heck I do, honestly. God uses us as instruments. So that's how I would, I try to, when I work with priests, I try to put it in the context of, it's not about getting it perfect. Just about staying out of the way, doing stupid stuff and devoting it to God. I do stupid stuff all the time, and I devote it to God. And, I try to make my amends when I've been an idiot, but I still see him use it. So any priest listening, you get to be human.
That seems like one of the gifts that you bring to the bishops and the priests. I want to go back to a couple of things that you said because they've really stayed with me. One is when you talked about the priest being wounded, and not just by previous trauma, but wounded by this whole sex abuse crisis, and that you're there not only to present how to relate to a wounded victim in a healthy way, but you're also there to minister to their woundedness, is what I heard you say.
It's very true. Thanks, Bob, for picking up on that. I'm the only survivor of people trying to do different things I know that is called this way that I know. And what I would say is, first, they are wounded. They're, in some ways, they're there as Christ before their whole parish. Survivors and families are wounded by this rupture. Parishes and schools, I go in and work with parishes, they're a mess sometimes. Priests also have to watch other priests be accused. And either way it goes is terrible. It's either an innocent man or it's a guilty guy who is your best friend. And then you take all the anger from the parishes when even the bishops don't quite know how to talk when a scandal happens. I've watched the anger just get focused on this poor priest who's just doing his thing. So what I would say is, I talk a lot to priests about that, but the healing, all it is helping priests realize that they are enough, that God called them and gives them the graces to be creative in the unique ways. They're also different. So, and yet also has given the priesthood and the sacraments through them. That is actually enough. And the entire world tells them the opposite. So that is extremely healing to an individual who feels like I could be all these great things. I've given my life in full sacrifice to a world that has no idea what that sacrifice is about half the time. And in fact, there isn't an area that I'm excluded from ministering in. That is an incredible healing experience themselves. A lot of times being able to tell me about their abuse or their trauma and kind of learning from it's really powerful. Watching them even talk to their parishes who are all, at any one Sunday, the statistic is over 50% of people have gone through some trauma in the past 12 months. So all of a sudden it becomes an evangelical moment for them to understand the language needed by survivors because they're ministering to survivors. It's an amazing thing. I couldn't imagine living through the hell and all the times I thought I was going to just die, that I would go from that in my 20s to this in my 60s, being able to see that. But they do, and they absorb the pain of the survivors and the families and the parishes. They do that. And I guess I would just say, I think in some ways it seems like a crucifix of its own. We were talking about this one group of priests in one support group we were running, and they were talking about the anxiety of what priests do go through for fear of the accusation out of nowhere. And I was feeling really bad about that because I really get angry about false accusations. I also know there are accusations where people are so confused, they haven't sorted it out yet, and we want to help them have the time they need to be accurate, so we need to not overreact. But all I could do is give in a kind of a prayer, in a kind of a gift. As a kid, I never knew when the abuse was going to happen. I was, you'd go through a couple of days and nothing would happen. A priest would leave, you'd think it'd be over, the next guy'd come in. In the end, you just absorb that as in your body, that you're always on edge. All I could do is offer that as a gift of a prayer in return. And in that circle with those particular priests, it was very comforting. It did not take away the reality that's been created by the mess that existed. But at least in relationship, we could bring the love of the Spirit. So it's all broken. There's nothing, I don't work in a place where everything gets restored to what it was. And I'm in awe of priests, that they'd be priests with these situations, but they are quite amazing people.
Teresa, we've been talking so far, from the angle and kind of emphasizing the priest. Would you be willing for a moment to shift a bit and talk a bit about the experience and angle of the victim? I'm sure that we have numerous people who listen to our podcast who have a similar story as yours, even with their own unique, experiences there. Something that I think that's just fascinating to me is the work you're doing, again, I'm reemphasizing what I said earlier, that a priest being healing to someone who is abused by a priest is only in the kingdom of God. That seems possible because it's you run from the thing that's hurt you, right? Kind of concept, or you destroy it. So the concept of healing coming through that's amazing. The journey, like I'm hearing you emphasize the journey. I can hear in your disposition the patience that you have, and the emphasis on safety and how hard it can be to just get safe again. And so just wherever your heart desires to go, can you talk to us a bit about the journey? Like, where might someone start with this, and how does one typically journey through this?
Well, first I'll add to the definitions of abuse, and then I'll talk a little bit about that journey. Because the other thing that naturally happens is I work with a lot of survivors and family members who are wounded by like 1 degree of separation. So I'll speak to that in a moment. What I ask people to remember is there are many ways people look at abuse and abusers, define what abuse is, and I don't quibble with those. There's many definitions. My personal definition is that child sexual abuse and abuse of vulnerable people as well is really domination by sexual means. And it's not always just sexual. It's physically abusive. It's verbally abusive. The grooming is emotionally manipulative. So it's really important to remember a lot of us are struggling. No, Bob has done some really great work on sexual woundedness that comes out of this. So it's within this world that all of these things exist at once. A lot of us also are going to be struggling with not just trust, but at the heart of trust is giving somebody a little bit of power over you, is putting down the vigilance. It wasn't until my 30s that a tiny sound 5 rooms away didn't send me jumping if I was in one of my, I would guess, call agony states or not. I was vigilant. I was physically, the cortisol was probably packing. So it's really important to remember, I think, the survivors are going to be figuring out if you're trying to get power over them, manipulate them. Even if you're trying to persuade us for their good, we're going to resist it. You know what? It's not crazy. The world might call it crazy. It is not crazy to be a little worried about that. It's not crazy to be paranoid if you've been a kid and everybody around you's been an abuser or an enabler. The levels of distrust, even of anger, is not so crazy to be outraged. It's the right moral response. So there are ways I wish people could understand from inside the symptoms, the reasonableness of them. And for survivors, I'm like, just start where you are. If you're angry, okay, what is it about? And how is it affecting your life right now? Is it holding you back? Because, coming up with, as Bob mentions, if we all have a sense of where we're trying to get to, you start being able to measure if something's hurting or not. One of the things I would associate with my early recovery and a lot of early recovery of people is running around like your back's on fire. You're trying to escape the fire. You're in the psychic agony that's physical as well. And you're just running so fast. And you're going to try anything, tell anybody. You're going to try drugs. You're going to try crazy stuff. Or you're going to try telling everybody. Or you're going to try, like I did, just working like a maniac. So I looked high functioning, right? I looked successful. And I was in hell. And that's what you want to start ratcheting down. So that process, I work with like a family. The family's in crisis because a kid is maybe being suicidal. Now, it's possible that kid could be a survivor or a victim, current victim, trying to take abuse to its next logical step. Abuse feels like you're getting killed. Take it to the next step. There's not really that much insanity there until somebody talks to you. But it also could be that kid's being a scapegoat because one of the other children are being abused. It's really important to understand how ugly this all looks. and how hopeless it all feels. And then taking it one step at a time. I worked 7 years with survivors of human trafficking too. How to walk out of a burning building, survive when it collapses behind you, and keep walking. And this is where, for me, my constant love-hate with the church was actually kind of saved my life, because I was always focusing on, ultimately, whether I knew it or not, God. I don't know if that answers your question, but all I know is, and this is the heartbreaking thing, some people are so wounded by abuse, they never find in themselves the fire in the belly to fight it. And you gotta have that. And I've sat with survivors. I've known too many suicides. I've known way too many addicts. And that's why we have to minister even to the people who never make it, There, to me, is holy. Actually, they're probably as far as they can get, and that's the bravest thing they can do, to stay on the methadone or to keep having relapse with alcohol. But it's still incredibly brave because they're still there. It's not a ministry for everybody, even for every priest, but it's very, you got to be there. I don't know if I helped. I don't have a trajectory to offer you other than to say, relationally, we just have to be there.
I loved what you just said about listening to the symptoms from the inside, that they all make sense. Whatever the world looks at as addicted or crazy or bizarre or out of control, when you've experienced it from the inside and you can empathize with somebody else who's experienced, however they're responding to it makes sense. Because as you said, it's like, how do you survive internally something that just has fractured you at that level? The trust, the hope, the powerlessness, the fear, the shame, everything that's a part of that. Just as I loved your analogy of your back's on fire and you're running from what you can never get away from.
That was definitely me in my early 20s, Bob, too. Just when people look at me now and think, I'm still a work in progress, but if anybody knew me in my 20s, I was in agony. I was just, you don't even know what you're doing. You're just reacting to survive. And in the best state, you're in autopilot and functioning. That's your good day. Your best day, you're thinking about it and falling apart. And that's why, if we can walk the peace of God into that person's path, even for a short time, survivors live off crumbs. Families fall apart. All the dreams fall apart. Everything you thought you might become doesn't exist anymore. Your free will shot. We're going to live off the crumbs of real things. It doesn't take much to cross a path as a survivor and give them something to follow. And as long as your ego's not trying to give them you, and you're really trying to give them God, you're doing a great thing.
Teresa, I'm curious if an analogy resonates with you. An analogy I've used before in trying to give people the perspective of what it's like to accompany someone after a trauma, after an abuse, etc., is I liken it to a concentration camp. And we all have these harrowing images in our minds of those who were released from concentration camps in World War II, and they are free, quote unquote, at the moment that the photo is taken because they're no longer in the concentration camp. However, they're far from thriving, and visually you can just see it because of their emaciated bodies. And the analogy that I try to impart to people is sometimes you can't see visually like you can in those photos the devastation that's occurred from the abuse. And so if I can't see it, then okay, I might make some mistakes in throwing expectations or reactions at people, but the visual that comes out of those photos has been very helpful for me to go, in some ways I'm getting a spiritual, emotional image here of what it's like when someone's left a traumatic situation. Sure, the abuse might not be happening anymore, but you can't in any way say that that person's thriving. if the analogy is accurate. And so there's tenderness. Like you don't, even just what you're saying about crumbs, it's actually what made me think of it is you would assume, oh, we can now give them something that they've always wanted to eat. And actually, if you give them too much, it actually can devastate them and hurt them. And so there's this delicate art, is what I call it. I truly believe that it's an art form of loving someone well who has been deeply wounded. And now we all have been wounded, and there's an art form to it. And ultimately what I'm excited to hear you describing and in my experience embodying as we're dialoguing here is the art of accompanying someone who's been devastated by abuse. Does the analogy fit for your experience?
Yes, absolutely. I think I'll play back an analogy I work that's similar, but it's very true to remember the need for tenderness. I talk about the idea of we're all excited, right? We've got this fire hydrant gushing of water. Somebody just walked across the desert. You're going to give them half a thimbleful. And when one of the worst things you can do is get all excited, somebody comes to look for the Lord, and I watch people just, their faith is just bubbling over, but it's going to crush that survivor. So you're right. It could crush their bones. They've been in this concentration camp. I would also do it and there. Even as they stand before you, totally emaciated, starving, numb. It's sacred ground in the sense that you're encountering somebody stronger than most. And they don't even know it yet. This is the holiness of dealing with survivors. They don't even know it yet, but they've had an encounter with God I'll never have, even with my experience, that part of us is helping them find, so that it doesn't have to look like all the cool stuff we know about the church. It's like, what has this person found in the desert? So yes, it's a very true delicacy, agony. And there we have the cross and the resurrection, same instance. Your survivor just might not know anything about that resurrection.
Yeah, I really appreciate the "and" that you added there. Many a times I recall when I had my practice, I recall vividly leaving my office, being in a car ride home, just in awe and in some ways shocked by the capacity of the people that I worked with, floored by them. And they, quote unquote, to the world look like either a failure or an insignificant person, a nothing, a whatever. And you get, like you said, into the inside, and these are some of the bravest, strongest people I've ever known. And yet it's hidden, and few people will ever see that. So thank you for that addition. It's beautiful. Teresa, as we start to land the plane here, I really would love for people to know about what you offer, how, when, where you offer it. Like, how can people connect with you and move forward in these areas if that's where they're called?
Well, they can find contact information at spiritfire.online, which is my website. They'll find all sorts of free resources there too, like tip sheets and that kind of thing. I'm developing something they can use within parishes to help parishes become survivor sensitive. So there's that. I'm available for telephone call for somebody who's trying to figure out what to do with something. I always work with the bishop or the provincial because I want to put everyone at ease when I work with groups. But I'm happy to work. I give retreats. I work with priests, conference days. I've done that online and in person where it's useful. I serve on a number of review boards, and I work with review boards, and I also help them work with survivors and help them develop their spirituality to work with survivors. I do training that also could be used as educational credits for people who are working on safeguarding. So I'm pretty much available on one-to-one, small groups, larger groups, online, in person. That's what I do. And I also work with deacon formation and with lay ministries. although I'm very much the bias that you would hear there of the role of the priest is very much part of what I work with laity too. So sometimes, some laity is more inclined to that or others. That's what I just do that all the time. And also, sometimes people ask me to write something for their paper because they're working out something. And I also work with parishes that are in crisis after abuse comes up. So I'm pretty much just around.
Awesome. So listeners, spiritfire.online. I'm looking at it right now. There's just tons of resources here and ministry programs, helplines, safeguarding. I really want to encourage you to check that out. It's awesome. Bob, any kind of final thoughts here and reflections with Teresa before we wrap up today?
Couple of thoughts. One, Teresa, thank you. Just thank you for the battle that you fought and that your heart towards God, even when all that was confused, and because I could just hear the grace that just pours out of you and into the church, into the restoration of the thing that got broken, that is broken, that's been broken individually and collectively as a church and in the priesthood. And, the wound that the bishops and priests carry. I know a lot of priests and bishops who, this is a very painful wound, and just thank you for being the salve of Jesus in those places.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be here. Thank you.
It's wonderful ministry. I echo everything Bob said. There's certain pockets of the kingdom of God that few people are called to, and you're in one of them. And so it's a beautiful thing to be able to have you share story and experience because people need this. And so I'm just grateful for you and really hope that any one of our listeners, priest, bishop, clergy, whomever, or victim themselves that could benefit from you would reach out to you. So again, spiritfire.online. Teresa, thanks so much for being with us. And we're super grateful for all that you do and for spending the time with us. So God bless you. And listeners, we hope this episode blessed you as well. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.